Hey YouTube, I bought a new junky guitar at a pawn shop and I wanted to tell you about it. This one is a weird one. I first went out looking. I picked up some pickups off of Craigslist, some American Fender pickups. I got some Super 55s and some Tex-Mex pickups. And so I decided that that was the point, since I have a bunch of other parts, that was kind of the point that I needed to go ahead and find a donor body for my Partscaster. And so I roamed around all the pawn shops in the area, and since I live near Austin, there are tons of instruments at damn near every pawn shop. And so I went roaming around. They're not always priced appropriately. They're often more expensive than they should be. Pawn shops are kind of problematic in that way. Sometimes you can negotiate, sometimes they don't have anybody on staff that can make those kind of decisions. But we have a couple of good pawn shops that price their stuff reasonably. They seem to do a little research and understand that a Squier, for example, is not an actual Strat and that they can't charge, $150 or whatever for a low-end Squier. Anyway, so I went looking for a donor body. I had some basic requirements. I wanted a full-size body. I didn't want the thin affinities. There's nothing wrong with affinities, but I wanted my Partscaster because I'm going to make a proper, it's going to be nice. It's going to have nice American Fender pickups. Plan to put all good electronics in it. Some various, coil splitting options and that kind of thing. Going to make it a pretty nice guitar. So I wanted the body to be just like my American and my Mexican Strat. So that was one of the requirements. I figured if it had a straight neck, that would be great. I have a nice Squier neck that I was going to use if the guitar I found that I liked didn't have a good neck. But I figured if it had a good neck and it had a large, one of the, vintage style headstocks, the bigger headstocks, that'd be cool because my Squier neck that I have has a smaller headstock, which I don't mind. I like the modern headstocks too, and both of my American and Mexican Strat have the smaller headstocks. That's no problem. But I thought it would be cool to have something a little different. And boy, did I ever find something different. Look at that headstock. Isn't that ridiculous? So let me tell you about this. This is a weird guitar. It is a Fender Starcaster. Now, Starcaster, you may or may not know, the brand Starcaster, that name, has a long and storied history. It started out as a competitor to the Gibson 335 or the Epiphone 335 or whatever, and then then they repurposed the name sometime, I guess, in the 70s or maybe early 80s to be their department store brand, the one that they would sell at discount stores. And it seems to have stayed with that purpose for many years. And my association with it, because I'm a kid of the 80s and I started learning to play guitar in the 80s, was that Starcaster was the really, really low-end Fender, even beneath Squier. So you had like Fender, and then you had Mexican Fenders, and then you had Squiers, and then below even that was the Starcaster, and that was what you would get if you went to a department store. So I wasn't even looking for a Starcaster, wasn't even considering it. And when I search Craigslist for guitars, even if I'm looking for a cheap guitar, that's something that's going to be a donor body or something that's going to be for parts or whatever, or if it's for a friend that's looking for a real cheap budget instrument to get started on, even in those cases, I never thought to look for a Starcaster, because in my mind, a Starcaster is basically garbage. You basically just buy it and throw it right away. Just dump it away. Just trash the thing. But it turns out, at some point, looks like, according to my Google search, at some point, maybe for Costco, maybe for something else, maybe for some other dealer, they started making what is, as far as I can tell, I've pulled it all apart, this is basically a Squier Standard Strat. which is actually a pretty good guitar if you're familiar with that. There's a lot of cool features on it. Things like 2-point tremolo, which actually works really well now that I've got it set up. I had to put an extra spring in there, a new beefy spring in there, and I got it set up nicely, and so it's sitting nice and level, and it works great. Surprisingly holds tune pretty well. I'm gonna put a nicer nut in here, and so, but I won't block the trim because it works great. The pickups are Alnico pickups, which is wild for a guitar this cheap. I don't know about the humbucker. I'm not sure what it is. But it is. I looked up the part number, and it is something that Squier, they ship in Squier. So this is basically a Squier Standard Strat with a weird ass headstock. And but the neat thing about it, I guess, for me, and the reason I picked it up is because it was sitting on the rack right next to a Squier Standard Strat, but had a price that was half. Because I guess if you go on eBay and you look for Starcasters, which is what this says on the headstock, you find that they're really cheap. They only go, they don't bring a lot of money because they historically were kind of crap. So yeah, this is kind of a weird one. There's not a lot of these out there. I couldn't find one of this exact model on eBay. So I don't know what they go for, but I know what a standard, a Squier Standard Strat goes for, and I paid a lot less than that for this. I picked this guy up for $70. It had just been put on the rack. And like I say, right next to it was a Squier Standard Strat, overpriced at about $135 or $140, and it had been on the rack for a while, and had been dropping in price. They'd initially put it up at like $200, which is stupid. Nobody pays $200 for a used, beat-up Squier. Anyway, this one was in reasonably good but filthy condition. There were a couple of screws missing from the bridge. I had to replace those with one of my other donor guitars. But once I got it home and spent a couple of hours cleaning it up, this was a really, really dirty guitar. Somebody had played the heck out of it. There's quite a lot of fret wear. I don't think it's enough fret wear to where I won't be able to level it and get it working nice. But quite a bit of fret wear, a lot of finger gunk and grime all up and down the neck. The frets were nasty. So I spent a couple of hours just cleaning this thing up. But otherwise, it's in really good shape. The neck straightened up right away. The truss rod worked great, better than on many of my more expensive guitars. And for a 10-year-old guitar or a 15-year-old guitar, that's great. So let me talk about the specs a little more, and we'll just be specific. If you don't know what a standard Squier has, we'll talk about it. They're Alnico single coil pickups. They're staggered. They've got these staggered pull pieces. I don't know if you can see that at all, but that's just like if you go and pick up a proper Fender, it's going to have the staggered thing, and now the player Strats have Alnico pickups. These aren't comparable to that, and I'll talk about what the differences are in a minute. Like I say, I don't know what this humbucker is, but it is the same one that comes in a Squier. Bridge is the 2-point tremolo, which works great. Electronics are cheap, tiny pots, but it works. It's functional. Tuners are crap, which I think is roughly the same kind of crap that comes on Squiers. Although I've seen Squiers with nicer, looks like Mexican style tuners that have a Squier logo on them. But I don't know when they started shipping those, or if those are shipped on every Squier or what. But yeah, so tuners have got to go. But I think when I make my Partscaster, I'm gonna go against the general wisdom of the internet, which hates this headstock. Everybody I found talking about this were like, I had to get rid of the headstock, or I hate the headstock. I actually really like the triangle headstock. So instead of putting my Squier Strat headstock on here, I think I'm going to keep that, and I'll put my own little logo of something on there, just a picture of something silly or whatever, once I paint it. I hate the paint job. It is that sort of matte sparkle look that was super popular through the late 90s and mid 2000s. I mean, I still see people painting their Partscasters this way, but I like a more classic look. So I plan to go with one of the classic colors. I'm going to do Sonic Blue or Surf Green or like a Buttercream Yellow, something along those lines. We'll replace the pick guard. Yeah, let me check my notes and see what else I wanted to talk about. Oh yeah, so I wanted to also mention that the now Starcaster has gone back to being Fender's hollow body. And they look really cool. So that's interesting. They've kind of, the brand has done a full circle and has come back all the way back around to being a cool classic guitar style. Let's see. Oh, and the headstock. This headstock, as I said, I like it. Nobody else does. They only shipped them for a little while. Most of the Starcasters you're going to find have the, Strat style headstock. Yeah, so I'm pretty pleased with the price I got on this because there were only a few things wrong with it, and they were things that I was able to fix without having to spend any money. I just put some time and elbow grease into it. Yeah, let's see. Oh, it's made in Indonesia, just like the standard Squier and just like some of the other sort of middle tier Squier stuff. I have a vintage modified Squier P bass that was made in Indonesia, and the build quality is great. The setup on it was awful. I don't know if the guy or the person who owned it before me and played the heck out of it just didn't know how to set up their guitar, if they tweaked it. I think they did, because the bridge saddles had been dropped way low, so the screws were sticking way up. And that just came down to the neck had bowed way up over time. It needed quite a bit of adjustment to straighten it out. Once I straightened it out, I was able to bring these saddles back up, so it's a lot more comfortable. I might put some shorter saddle screws in there because there's still a few sticking up. But otherwise, in great shape. The reputation that Starcasters have, because they're sold in department stores, is that they do have a terrible setup, and that they did have a terrible setup. And that's kind of true of Squiers as well. It's real easy to get a badly set up Squier because it's such a cheap instrument. Music stores don't want to spend a lot of time setting them up. And I've spent already a couple of hours on this guy, and and I haven't even done anything really. I haven't done anything complicated. I'm going to pull it apart, and when I do the paint job, I'll pull it apart and make sure the neck is super straight, and I'll do a fret level on it and crown and polish and round over these ends because they're a little rough, but not bad, not terrible. But that'll be when I do the full, just a total rebuild of this guitar. And so I'll have the neck off for painting anyway, so I might as well do all the stuff that I want to do with it. But basically, I just put some new strings on it, did a basic setup on it, and cleaned it up. And this is how it came from the pawn shop. Let's see. Yeah, so the pros and cons of this guy. It turns out it's really not that weird. It seemed really weird at first when I saw it on the shelf with that weird-ass headstock, but it's really not that weird. It's really just a Squier Standard Strat, which is great. That's a great, platform for me, since I'm looking for a build, for something to build on. But yeah, so the pros are it's surprisingly good overall. I like the neck now that it is straight. I like the trim. It's not as good as the American standard trim, but I think it's better than my Mexican standard trim, which is the six screw tremolo. I think I enjoy it more. I know some people like the tonal characteristics of the 6 screws going directly into the body, but I like the posts, and I like being able to float it a little bit and get the and so that's cool. I'll need go pickups. That's great. They don't sound as good as I would like, and I'll cover that in the cons, I guess. Yeah, so those are the obvious obvious pros. It's just a good all-around basic guitar. All the good things that you would say about a standard Squier Strat you would say about this guy, because it seems to be exactly the same guitar. So the cons, and I'll play it for you in just a second and you can hear what some of the cons are. The pickups are harsh. The bridge in particular is kind of brutally rough. So I don't like the sound of that bridge. Once you start mixing the pickups though, and once you get into the single coils, it becomes a lot nicer. So that's a bridge in the middle, and that actually sounds pretty nice. It softens up the bridge some, somehow. Middle is still a little harsh. Like I say, a little brighter than I like there. But then you mix them. So that position sounds pretty good. That's the fourth position, or second position, depending on which direction you're counting from. It's these two pickups combined. And the top position is not too bad either. So yeah, so pretty good once you get into the single coils. I really don't like the humbucker, but I plan to replace all the pickups anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I guess it's worth mentioning that they are really super stupid hot, especially for Alnicos. I'm surprised. You expect ceramics, especially cheap ceramics, to be sort of hot and have low headroom where they sound over compressed and over whatever. These don't sound compressed. They've got a nice snap to them. Surprisingly good for a cheap guitar. But getting a clean sound out of my little Vox over here, which is just a volume, and I have a Vox AC4 that we're listening to this through, and it has switchable wattages, and we're on the 4-watt setting, and I have turned volume way down just to get it so I could get a reasonably clean tone. But even now, that humbucker's still breaking up a little bit on the preamp, or the amp. So getting a clean tone out of this is challenging on a tube amp. But overall, for a $70 pawn shop junk pickup, purchase, this is very pleasing. It's more guitar than I expected to get for $70 at a pawn shop in particular, since you don't really get good deals at pawn shops. Again, I think it was just a matter of the name Starcaster means cheap garbage, and so that's what their Google search revealed, and they priced it like any other Starcaster, and this turns out to be a much better guitar than most Starcasters. So I plan to do, over the next couple of weeks, and I'll do videos on some of those steps. I'm going to repaint this guy. I'm going to do a refinish with probably some kind of nice sonic blue or one of the classic colors, something nice and light, because my other Strats, I have a black Strat and I have a sunburst Strat. I want something that's maybe a Beatles-esque sonic blue kind of thing, or something along those lines. I like white guitars. I like super light guitars. And I'm going to put some new pickups in it. I have a pair of Tex-Mex and I have a pair of Super 55s, which are both Fender American pickups. And I don't have any humbuckers, but I'll pick up something nice, a nice Seymour Duncan or DiMarzio or one of the Fenders. I even really like the sound of the new Player series of Strat stuff, and you can pick those up on eBay relatively cheap because people are swapping them out with something fancier. But I think they sound pretty good. I haven't actually tried the humbucker. I like the single coils out of the new Player Strats. New electronics. I'll put some CTS or Bourne, big fat pots in here. Nice Switchcraft switches and jack. I'm going to put some new string trees on. I like the American string trees, and so I'll put a set of those on here. It's only like $6 or $7 to get the American string trees, so I'll get that. I might replace the saddles if these prove to be problematic. They feel okay. They're cheap cast pot metal. Not as nice as what's on the American. As I understand it, you can't put the American saddles on this design of bridge, so I may even end up having to replace the whole bridge, but I don't really want to do that since it's already a 2-point trim and it already works pretty well. So maybe Graphtec saddles or something will fit. Surely there's some way to upgrade these saddles if I find I don't like them. I might just clean them up and make sure that they're nice and smooth. We'll probably replace the nut with a Graphtec nut. I also have some bone nuts that came in a gear buy that I bought, just a junk box that I bought from somebody for a few bucks. So I might put that in instead. So yeah, so like and subscribe if you want to see what I do with this. I think it's going to turn out really good because all the basics are here. The bones of this is great.